British Goblins. Book 1. The Realm of Faerie. At eve, the primrose path along, the milkmaid shortens with a song her solitary way. She sees the fairies with their queen trip hand in hand the circled green, and hears them raise, at times unseen, the ear-enchanting lay. Reverend John Logan, Ode to Spring, 1780. Chapter 1 Fairy Tales and the Ancient Mythology, the Compensations of Science, Existing Belief in Fairies in Wales, the Faith of Culture, the Credulity of Ignorance, the Old-Time Welsh Fairyland, the Fairy King, the Legend of St. Collen and Gwyn ap Nudd, the Green Meadows of the Sea, Fairies at Market, the Land of Mystery. With regard to other divisions of the field of folklore, the views of scholars differ, but in the realm of fairy these differences are reconciled. It is agreed that fairy tales are relics of the ancient mythology and the philosophers stroll hand in hand harmoniously. This is as it should be, in a realm about which cluster such delightful memories of the most poetic period of life, childhood, before skepticism has crept in as ignorance slinks out. The knowledge which introduced skepticism is infinitely more British Goblins valuable than the faith it displaced, but, in spite of that, there be few among us who have not felt evanescent regrets for the displacement by the foi scientifique of the old faith in fairies. There was something so peculiarly fascinating in that old belief, that once upon a time, the world was less practical in its facts than now, less commonplace and humdrum, less subject to the inexorable laws of gravitation, optics, and the like. What dramas it has yielded! What poems, what dreams, what delights! But since the knowledge of our maturer years destroys all that, it is with a degree of satisfaction we can turn to the consolations of the fairy mythology. The beloved tales of old are not true, but at least they are not mere idle nonsense, and they have a good and sufficient reason for being in the world. We may continue to respect them. The wit who observed that the final cause of fairy legends is to afford sport for people who ruthlessly track them to their origin, Carrot expressed a grave truth in jocular form. Since one can no longer rest in peace with one's ignorance, it is a comfort to the lover of fairy legends to find that he need not sweep them into the grate as so much rubbish. On the contrary, they become even more enchanting in the crucible of science than they were in their old character. Among the vulgar in Wales, the belief in fairies is less nearly extinct than casual observers would be likely to suppose. Even educated people who dwell in Wales, and have dwelt there all their lives, cannot always be classed as other than casual observers in this field. There are some such residents who have paid special attention to the subject, and have *. Saturday Review, October 20, 1877. The Realm of Faerie formed an opinion as to the extent of prevalence of popular credulity herein, but most Welsh people of the educated class, I find, have no opinion, beyond a vague surprise that the question should be raised at all. So lately as the year 1858, a learned writer in the Archaeologia Cambrensis declared that the traveller may now pass from one end of the principality to the other, without his being shocked or amused, as the case may be, by any of the fairy legends or popular tales which used to pass current from father to son. But in the same periodical, 18 years later, I find Mr. John Walter Lucas, president of the Cardiff Naturalists Society, asserting with regard to the cromlechs, tumuli, and ancient camps in Glamorganshire, there are always fairy tales and ghost stories connected with them. Some, though fully believed in by the inhabitants of those localities, are often of the most absurd character. In fact, the more ridiculous they are, the more they are believed in. My own observation leads me to support the testimony of the last-named witness. Educated Europeans generally conceive that this sort of belief is extinct in their own land, or, at least their own immediate section of that land. They accredit such degree of belief as may remain, in this enlightened age, to some remote part, to the south, if they dwell in the north, to the north, if they dwell in the south. But especially they accredit it to a previous age, in Wales, to last century, or the Middle Ages, or the days of King Arthur. The rector of Merthyr, being an elderly man, accredits it to his youth. I am old enough to remember, he wrote me under date of January 30, 1877, that these tales were thoroughly believed in among country folk 40 or 50 years asterisk, Archaeologia Cambrensis, 4th Shay. Vi. 174. A2 British Goblins. Ago, people of superior culture have held this kind of faith concerning fairy lore, it seems to me, in every age, except the more remote. Chaucer held it, almost 5 centuries ago, and wrote, "In oldie days of the King Arthur, Owl was this land fid filled of fiery. I speak of many 100 year ago, but now can no man see none else mo." Dryden held it, 200 years later, and said of the fairies I speak of ancient times, for now the swain returning late may pass the woods in vain, and never hope to see the nightly train. In all later days, other authors have written the same sort of thing. It is not thus now, say they, but it was recently thus. The truth, probably, is that if you will but sink down to the level of common life, of ignorant life, especially in rural neighborhoods, there you will find the same old beliefs prevailing, in about the same degree to which they have ever prevailed, within the past 500 years. To sink to this level successfully, one must become a living unit in that life, as I have done in Wales and elsewhere, from time to time. Then one will hear the truth from, or at least the true sentiments of, the class he seeks to know. The practice of every generation in thus relegating fairy belief to a date just previous to its own does not apply, however, to superstitious beliefs in general, for, concerning many such beliefs, the greater or less prevalence at certain dates, as in the history of witchcraft, is matter of well-ascertained fact. I confine the argument, for the present, strictly to the domain of fairy. In this domain, the prevalent belief in Wales may be said to rest with the ignorant, to carrot, with a Bade's tale, Canterbury Tales. The realm of fairy, be strongest in rural and mining districts, to be childlike and poetic, and to relate to anywhere except the spot where the speaker dwells, as to the next parish, to the next county, to the distant mountains, or to the shadow land of Gwerddon Eilean, the green meadows of the sea. 3. In Arthur's day and before that, the people of South Wales regarded North Wales as preeminently the land of fairy. In the popular imagination, that distant country was the chosen abode of giants, monsters, magicians, and all the creatures of enchantment. Out of it came the fairies, on their visits to the sunny land of the south. The chief philosopher of that enchanted region was a giant who sat on a mountain peak and watched the stars. It had a wizard monarch called Gwyn, who possessed the power of changing himself into the strangest possible forms. The peasant who dwelt on the shores of Dyfed Dymetia saw in the distance, beyond the blue waves of the ocean, shadowy mountain summits piercing the clouds, and guarding this mystic region in solemn majesty. Thence rolled down upon him the storm clouds from the home of the tempest, thence streamed up the winter sky the flaming banners of the northern lights, thence rose through the illimitable darkness on high, the star-strewn pathway of the fairy king. These details are current in the Mabinogion, those brilliant stories of Welsh enchantment, so gracefully done into English by Lady Charlotte Guest, and it is believed that all the Mabinogion in which these details were found were written in Dyfed. This 1 foot the Mabinogion, from the Welsh of the Clwbacoch o Hergest. Translated, with notes, by Lady Charlotte Guest. New edition, London, 1877. British Goblins. Was the region on the west, now covered by Pembroke, Carmarthen, and Cardigan shires. More recently than the time above indicated, special traditions have located Fairyland in the Vale of Neath, in Glamorganshire. Especially does ascertain steep and rugged crag there, called Craig y Ddinas, bear a distinctly awful reputation as a stronghold of the fairy tribe. Its caves and crevices have been their favorite haunt for many centuries, and upon this rock was held the court of the last fairies who have ever appeared in Wales. Needless to say, there are men still living who remember the visits of the fairies to Craig y Ddinas, although the little folk are no longer seen there. It is a common remark that the Methodists drove them away. Indeed, there are numberless stories which show the fairies to have been animated, when they were still numerous in Wales, by a cordial antipathy for all dissenting preachers. In this antipathy, it may be here observed, teetotallers were included. I.B. The sovereign of the fairies, and their especial guardian and protector, was one Gwyn ap Nudd. He was also ruler over the Goblin tribe in general. His name often occurs in ancient Welsh poetry. An old bard of the 14th century, who, led away by the fairies, rode into a turf bog on a mountain one dark night, called it the fish pond of Gwyn ap Nudd, a palace for goblins and their tribe. The association of this legendary character with the goblin fame of the Vale of Neath will appear, when it is mentioned that Nudd in Welsh is pronounced simply Neath, and not otherwise. As for the Fairy Queen, there are 2 hills in Glamorganshire called by this name, and others elsewhere in Wales. The Realm of Faerie, she does not seem to have any existence among Cambrian Goblins. It is nevertheless thought by Cambrian etymologists, that Morgana is derived from Morgwyn, the White Maid, and the Welsh proper name Morgan can hardly fail to be mentioned in this connection, though it is not necessarily significant. The legend of St. Collen, in which Gwyn ap Nudd figures, represents him as king of Annwn, Hell, or the Shadowland, as well as of the fairies. Collen was passing a period of mortification as a hermit, in a cell under a rock on a mountain. There he one day overheard 2 men talking about Gwyn ap Nudd, and giving him this twofold kingly character. Collen cried out to the men to go away and hold their tongues, instead of talking about devils. For this Collen was rebuked, as the king of Fairyland had an objection to such language. The saint was some morn to meet the king on the hilltop at noon, and after repeated refusals, he finally went there, but he carried a flask of holy water with him. And when he came there he saw the fairest castle he had ever beheld, and around it the best appointed troops, and numbers of minstrels and every kind of music of voice and string, and steeds with youths upon them, the comeliest in the world, and maidens of elegant aspect, sprightly, light of foot, of graceful apparel, and in the bloom of youth, and every magnificence becoming the court of a puissant sovereign. And he beheld a courteous man on the top of the castle who bade him enter, saying that the king was waiting for him to come to meet. And Collen went into the castle, and when he came there the king was sitting in a golden chair. And he welcomed Collen honorably, and desired him to eat, assuring him that besides what he saw, he should have the Greel, 8 Vo. London, 1805 p. 337. 8 British Goblins. Most luxurious of every dainty and delicacy that the mind could desire, and should be supplied with every drink and liquor that the heart could wish, and that there should be in readiness for him every luxury of courtesy and service, of banquet and of honorable entertainment, of rank and of presence, and every respect and welcome due to a man of his wisdom. I will not eat the leaves of the trees, said Collen. Didst thou ever see men of better equipment than these of red and blue? Asked the king. Their equipment is good enough, said Collen, for such equipment as it is. What kind of equipment is that? Said the king. Then said Collen, the red on the one part signifies burning, and the blue on the other signifies coldness. And with that Collen drew out his flask and threw the holy water on their heads, whereupon they vanished from his sight, so that there was neither castle nor troops, nor men, nor maidens, nor music, nor song, nor steeds, nor youths, nor banquet, nor the appearance of anything whatever but the green hillocks. b. The third form of Welsh popular belief as to the whereabouts of Fairyland corresponds with the Avalon of the Arthurian legends. The Green Meadows of the sea, called in the Triads Gwerddon Eilean, are the green fairy islands, reposing in sunlight and beauty on ocean's calm breast. Many extraordinary superstitions survive with regard to these islands. They were supposed to be the abode of the souls of certain druids, who, naughty holy enough to enter the heaven of the Christians, were still not wicked enough to be condemned to Carrot Parry's Welsh melodies, d. The Realm of Faerie. The tortures of Annvn, and so were accorded a place in this romantic sort of purgatorial paradise. In the 5th century a voyage was made, by the British King Gavran, in search of these enchanted islands. With his family he sailed away into the unknown waters, and was never heard of more. This voyage is commemorated in the Triads as one of the 3 losses by disappearance, the 2 others being Merlin's and Madog's. Merlin sailed away in a ship of glass. Madog sailed in search of America, and neither returned, but both disappeared forever. In Pembrokeshire and southern Carmarthenshire are to be found traces of this belief. There are sailors on that romantic coast who still talk of the Green Meadows of Enchantment lying in the Irish Channel to the west of Pembrokeshire. Sometimes they are visible to the eyes of mortals for a brief space, when suddenly they vanish. There are traditions of sailors who, in the early part of the present century, actually went ashore on the Fairy Islands, not knowing that they were such, until they returned to their boats, when they were filled with awe at seeing the islands disappear from their sight, neither sinking in the sea, nor floating away upon the waters, but simply vanishing suddenly. The fairies inhabiting these islands are said to have regularly attended the markets at Milford Haven and Larne. They made their purchases without speaking, laid down their money and departed, always leaving the exact sum required, which they seemed to know, without asking the price of anything. Sometimes they were invisible, but they were often seen, by sharp-eyed persons. There was always one special butcher at Milford Haven upon whom the fairies bestowed their patronage, instead of distributing their favours indiscriminately. The Low British Goblins. Milford Haven folk could see the green fairy islands distinctly, lying out a short distance from land, and the general belief was that they were densely peopled with fairies. It was also said that the latter went to and fro between the islands and the shore through a subterranean gallery under the bottom of the sea. Fairies marketing at Larne. That isolated cape which forms the county of Pembroke was looked upon as a land of mystery by the rest of Wales long after it had been settled by the Flemings in 1113. A secret veil was supposed to cover this sea-girt promontory. The inhabitants talked in an unintelligible jargon that was neither English, nor French, nor Welsh, and out of its misty darkness came fables of wondrous sort, and accounts of miracles marvelous beyond belief. Mythology and Christianity spoke together from this strange country, and one could not tell at which to be most amazed, the pagan or the priest.